Good morning and welcome to ASL's HR in 10.
At 10,
I'm Jason Perry,
and I'm Kimberly Bradshaw.
and each week we get together to talk about what's going on in the wonderful world of HR and employment law. And sometimes I feel we're scrabbling around for things that aren't COVID or aren't Ukraine to talk about. But I'm sure it got your attention as well, Kimberly. This week I was looking at the news story on visas for, let's call it global village work. I can't find a better way of describing it.
Oh, this is my favourite topic of the last few months, actually, and I'm just wondering where I'm going to go. So, as I understand it, it's called a digital nomad visa, and so far 26 countries have signed up to it.
Hmm.
And what it means is that provided you can work from home, you can work from their country, provided you don't become part of the workforce. So,
Yeah,
which you and I could absolutely do that
absolutely.
from
Well,
wherever we wanted.
so many people can. And what strikes me in the very early days of this crisis, as we all learned, we could work from, I don't want to say home, we could work from somewhere else other than our office, is what caught my attention. And the question is, what do you need? And for many people, if you have a laptop, that can be your phone, that can be your cloud connection. And, as long as you have a big enough screen to work on, you can kind of work anywhere. And the restrictions were about employment law and tax, weren't they?
Exactly. And because actually it does raise questions which I'm not qualified to answer about UK tax laws,
Hmm.
but provided you're still, employed by a UK organisation, I would assume they stay the same because you're not becoming part of the local workforce.
Yes.
And it's absolutely brilliant. I mean, as we were talking about, there's a whole range of different countries from Thailand and Mexico, which are my number two, one and two for where I'm going to go, through to Germany. And you can see it's a great incentive for companies because
Yeah.
they don't have to pay out for anybody, but they get almost like the tourist
Yes,
points.
yes. Effectively, you get somebody either renting or buying property. You get somebody spending their money on, anything from groceries to, everyday living costs. But what really caught my attention is we've seen a number of employers, and I think the big one was Airbnb, wasn't it, who started this? They had their work anywhere, and if I remember rightly, it was 3 months of the year you could work in another jurisdiction, anywhere on the planet. I think it pretty much was. But this takes the whole thing a step further because I think, was it Thailand that these nomad visas were potentially for up to 5 years at a time?
Indonesia.
Indonesia.
But a lot of them are for years and years and years.
Mm,
I think Germany was 3 years.
mm,
So you get a good extension and it costs absolutely nothing, a
yeah.
few £100, if that.
Yes. Yeah. I hate to use the phrase because it has a kind of political attachment here, but this is kind of like freedom of movement, isn't it?
Well, from your lips to our ears, Jason.
I try not to go political.
But it kind of is. I suppose where, from a practical point of view, is employers have to have that capacity in their contract
Yes.
because individuals don't have that automatic right.
Mm,
This would fall under flexible working requests, wouldn't it?
yes.
So, yeah, I think there's a bit of
Yeah,
policy
but there's
doing
many
that.
people. I mean, I had a good friend of mine, still is a good friend, I should say, just in case she's watching, um, who actually was doing a contract which, if I recall correctly, I mean, her work was indirectly associated with Transport for London. Um, but she had a deal with her employer where she could work for 3 months of the year in Spain and she would come and rent a property and spend the winter out there with a laptop and could function perfectly well. Um, and this just makes that much more readily available. I didn't check if Spain were on the list, but Barbados was my appeal. I thought I could broadcast HR in 10 from Barbados next week if I get this right.
Yes, exactly. I'm just having it. Oh, Spain is on the list.
There we go.
Yeah.
But that dramatically, it changes so much. So, what do employers have to do to start engaging with this? Because there's some internal process and procedure to think about, isn't there?
Yes, what I was saying earlier, it's like, are you going to allow people to do that?
Mm,
And what are the criteria? I mean, I would assume a good internet access or good service is going to be absolutely paramount.
mm,
You know, people might like to go to the North Pole and work from there for whatever reason, but you know, how good's the internet? So I think
yeah.
or employers need to think about the
Mm.
parameters. Um, and then launch it to the staff, because I think a lot of staff will think, great, this is fabulous.
Mm, yeah, it's interesting you say that. And before we move on subject, I'll just drop it in to show how achievable it is. The chief executive of a company we do a reasonable amount of work with, um, I know, has recently bought a yacht and is planning on getting an Elon Starlink satellite. So he has internet access from his yacht and believes he can continue running his company while sailing around the world. And I guess he doesn't need a visa for that, but it's an interesting one because your point over internet, even that's changing so fast as the technology is adapting to our new world.
It is. What's also going through my mind is, but what about human contact? What about the line management? You know,
Mm,
yes, we learned during COVID that you can, provided you learn to manage in a slightly different way, you can line manage effectively. But we also know from all the stats that we've and research that we've talked
mm.
about over the months that people still need interaction. They
Yes,
still need to know you. So yes, I'm going to go and live in Mexico for however many years they'll let me. But what about the team?
mm.
How is that going to be maintained? So
Yes.
that's another parameter that
A
organizations think
company,
about.
an organisation needs a very, very clear approach as to how they're going to manage that. But the other thing I think you need to find a way of blending into your procedures is the ability to call someone back.
Yes.
And that might not be we now require you to work back from the office. It might mean we require you to be available at 72 hours notice on 6 occasions a year to attend meetings. And those meetings could be management meetings. Where do you go if you've got a disciplinary or a grievance? Clearly, you have to find a way of tackling some of that.
Yeah.
And as great as it is, Zoom or Skype might not always be the answer.
Mm. And I think, a lesson can be learned from some of the organizations that have really embraced hybrid working, because
Mm,
there are a lot of people, a client of mine, for example, they've got people all over the UK, and their office is currently in London.
mm,
But they in their contracts, you have to be in for for these 3 days every month so that we can do X, Y, and Z. So
yeah.
those kinds of things are important.
Yeah, but it's how you interpret it and implement it rather than saying it is or isn't possible, isn't it? I think this is really exciting for any services based role where somebody literally can do this. I think it's a game changer. So,
It
very, very
is.
exciting.
What worries me is the slightly more old-fashioned line managers and leaders who still, despite COVID, have the attitude that if you're not here, you're not working, you're skiving off.
I was just tempted to say, are we talking about Jacob? But on that note, well, Mr. Rees-Mogg has his own views, and yes, let's move on a little bit. There are a few other things going on. I know you wanted to touch on today, weren't there?
Yes, cost of living crisis. There's a lot that HR can do, and it doesn't mean increasing pay,
Mm,
because a lot of companies can't. But for me, it's very much about, can you afford the price of an employee assistance program,
yeah,
which is quite effective.
and you're talking
Certainly.
£1 or 2 a week potentially. It's
Exactly.
peanuts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that provides such benefit to individuals. But also talk to them. Everybody's needs will be different, and
Mm,
find out what their needs are. Sometimes just a supportive understanding ear and letting them vent and
yes. Yeah.
get their frustration and fear out. But things like young people are more likely to be affected because they typically are on the lower end of the pay scale. Um, the those with disabilities are likely to be more affected.
Mm.
Particularly mental health.
It
It's
strikes me, and it's almost a statement of the bleeding obvious, but it strikes me flexibility is the key word. Um,
absolutely.
and it's trying to have almost, dare I say, a flexible approach to your flexible policy. And it's about adapting it to different people, different teams, and finding what works for them, isn't it?
It is, and there are finance companies out there, even local ones, who would come in and do a seminar, sorry,
Mm.
or a webinar for that
Yeah, yeah.
matter, on how you can budget better. So there's
Yes.
lots that people can do that doesn't mean increasing pay.
Indeed, indeed. Kimberly, HR in 10 has just become HR in 11.
And we missed off all the other topics.
I know. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure as ever talking to you. And thank you for watching.
Excellent to chat to you, Jason. See you next week.
See you next week. Bye bye for now.